So I just wanted to mention why I personally don't identify as an evangelical Christian anymore. But I think I might have to do that in two parts because we really would need to have a good understanding of what evangelicalism is. So, in order to describe this, the way that I would explain it is evangelicalism now in our culture is really more of a pathos. A lot of people have an idea or a sense of what it means, but they really, for the most part, wouldn't be able to define it. It's really more of a know it when you see it type of thing. But historically, evangelicalism is related to two other movements, fundamentalism and liberal theology. And so, liberal theology, believe it or not, came first. It was sort of, it emerged out of the Enlightenment. And then in the 19th century, it really became very prevalent, very, very prominent, largely due to the major strides that we were making in science and biblical studies. And so in the 20th century, there was this movement called fundamentalism, which was a reaction specifically to liberal theology. And the purpose of it was specifically to differentiate itself from it. And so fundamentalists kind of doubled down on a lot of things. Certain doctrines, literalism, and the intent was to make sure that they are not confused with any sort of liberal ideas. And fundamentalism really set its feet firmly to say anything besides these particular things that we believe, not only do we reject, but it is false in terms of the faith. So then evangelicalism kind of emerged as a response to both of these. It was an attempt to maintain the same sort of orthodox Christian doctrines that fundamentalism was affirming, but also to embrace the advances that had been made in scholarship and in science. But the point is that evangelicalism and fundamentalism are distinct from each other in terms of the concept, even though a lot of the ideas are very similar. Now, the problem in practice in our modern culture is that these two movements, evangelicalism and fundamentalism, are really largely conflated. And so they're essentially treated as the same. And this is likely due to the ideas of biblical inerrancy and things like this that have enough overlap between the two that most people don't even really care about the differentiators. So the point is, even though evangelicalism was an attempt to embrace science, and a lot of the theological ideas can be more flexible and they vary a lot more than fundamentalism, unfortunately, it's just treated the same nowadays as fundamentalism. Generally, if somebody says that they're evangelical, most people will assume fundamentalist doctrines, biblical inerrancy, the literal nature of the resurrection and the cross, and other things like this. However, experts such as sociologists and biblical scholars, they have identified what evangelicalism is precisely. And so there are basically four legs of the stool. You've got conversion, the idea that conversion is a necessary thing. You've got the doctrine of the cross, the emphasis on the doctrine of the cross, the centrality of the Bible in a term called biblicism, which I can explain more later. And then there's social activism, which consists of service, but primarily evangelism. And so evangelicalism is some form of these ideas. And now these can be broad, so depending on how you define it, evangelicals can have a variety of different views, and many will disagree on what precisely each of these terms means. And so overall, this is really how the idea of of evangelicalism in our modern culture kind of collapses into the fundamentalist ideas theologically. And these are basically that it is necessary for a person to believe that Jesus is Lord and confess this in order to be saved, in order to have salvation. The idea that Jesus' substitutionary atonement, penal substitutionary atonement in most cases, on the cross is what allows for our salvation. The Bible is inerrant, and there are other aspects to this sort of biblicism, and it's necessary for us to go out and proclaim God's word in order to make disciples and essentially converts to Christianity. So, in summary, that's the basic definition of evangelicalism. It's essentially a response to these two movements, liberal theology and fundamentalism, and it rests basically on these four legs of a stool. And I will explain why I'm not an evangelical personally.